Okay, here we go. Good evening,
right.
everyone, and welcome to P&P Live. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lisa Muscatine, and we're very delighted to be hosting journalist Kelly Weill here to talk about her new book, Off the Edge, Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. A couple of brief housekeeping notes. First, though, to post a question at any point during this evening's discussion, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And in the chat column, you'll find a link for purchasing copies of Off the Edge. Kelly reports for the Daily Beast, the news website, and her focus has been extremist movements and conspiracy theories. Now, the fact that those subjects even constitute a beat should tell you something about the current state of things. Kelly's window into extremism has been through the flat earth community, which she began monitoring in 2017, half as a joke, she says. But in the years since, she's come to see the flat earthers as representative of a much broader tendency to embrace irrational thinking, whether it's Pizzagate, QAnon, quack remedies for COVID, or claims of election fraud in the 2020 election. Alternate realities have taken hold among growing segments of the population and moved from the fringes to the centers of power, presenting a serious problem for our politics and our collective sanity. And Off the Edge, Kelly examines the origins of such anti-scientific delusional thinking, what motivates it, and how it's been spread through the internet and social media especially. She uses a history of flat earth theory as a case study, documenting its roots in a 19th century utopian English commune, its surprising endurance and popularity, and its links to other conspiracy theories. As she makes clear, belief in such theories tends to be more emotional than intellectual, often deriving from a sense of fear and uncertainty about the world and one's place in it. Our conversation with Kelly will be Will Sommer, also a reporter for the Daily Beast and co-host of the podcast Fever Dreams. And Will also has done quite a bit of reporting on political radicalization and right-wing conspiracy theories. In fact, is at work on a book himself about QAnon. So Kelly and Will, the screen is yours.
Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Okay. All right. Well, I'm so happy to be here today with Kelly to talk about her new book, Off the Edge. You can see a little boat falling off the edge of the flat earth there, which I think we'll get into as one of our many things. I mean, just to give my own personal plug for it, you can see the link in the chat to buy the book from Politics and Prose. Obviously, I've been familiar with Kelly's work for a while before I came to Daily Beast, afterwards to work with her. And I have to say, it's Kelly. It's been great getting to see a different side of your writing and reporting. And it's everything else aside. It's a very serious time for conspiracy theories and radicalization. But I also think it's a very funny read. I think you came up with a lot of funny details.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, conspiracy theories are serious, and the effects of flat earth theory are really serious, as I get into in the book. But I was drawn to that theory initially just because it seemed so outlandish, and there was a little bit of humor in it. So I tried to keep that alive through the book.
Absolutely. I mean, it reads like sometimes it's almost like a P.G. Wodehouse novel. You get into these 19th century noble oaths and all this kind of stuff. Well, first of all, just to kick things off, how did you get involved in reporting on flat earth?
So at the Daily Beast, where we both work, we spend a lot of time just sort of lurking in the weird corners of the internet. And that's sort of necessary to monitor extremist movements. You find a weird forum, you camp out there, and if you're lucky, you spot the narrative that's going to be bubbling up and be unavoidable in the next 6 months. And one thing I found around 2017 when I was hanging out in those corners was people were talking about flat earth. And I thought there's no way that they were serious. They were just trolling. And so I started digging into it and following flat earth channels. And I found that people were actually dead serious about this. So I started going to their conferences. I started talking to them on weekends. And I became pretty embroiled in the movement over the past 5 years or so.
So when you went to this conference, I mean, what was what was this first brush with the flat Earthiverse like?
It was really, really strange to be at a flat Earth conference. And so to set the scene, they're often at these hotel and convention centers. And the first one I went to had 600 flat earthers in attendance. So you go in as this huge space and people are milling around and you realize that you're the only person there, except for a couple other reporters, who has your sense of reality, who exists in a round world, at least in your mind. And that's really strange. And it's a very surreal feeling knowing that you have this obvious disconnect from most people there. And yet I realize that's probably how flat earthers feel a lot of the time, is that they normally feel like everybody else is at odds with them. So over the course of a couple days, I talked to just about everyone, or everyone I could rather. And I was on the receiving end of some pretty interesting claims, and I just tried to hear everyone out and understand, why they were saying those things.
So let's see. So when did you realize that you had enough here for a book?
I think it was after that first conference I went to in late 2018, and I filed 2,000 words, and we wrangled it down into a decent sized article. And I realized that I had God knows how much left to write. I really wanted to keep going there because it wasn't just one story to me. It kind of opened up a window of understanding belief. It was, flat Earth has always kind of worked as like a parable for me in understanding how people can really, really believe anything. And once I started thinking about it that way and thinking about the interviews I'd had with people, I felt like I could just keep going, and I didn't want to stop reporting that story.
Well, so I mean, let's get into, when you say what flat earthers believe, before I read this book, which also functions, among other things, as sort of an intellectual history of the flat earth movement, I thought maybe this is just kind of like a thing people occasionally believe that goes back to caveman days. But as you get into it, I mean, this is a specific movement with an ideological history and forebears and debates and all this kind of stuff. So what would you say flat earthers believe? And then what does that tell us about, more broadly, how people fall into beliefs like this?
Totally. So there's not one single flat earth belief. There are, variations on the theory, which I think is, it's interesting. It almost mimics a scientific theory in that way. But the broadest consensus they have is that Earth is it's a disk, like a Frisbee. Around the outer edge, there's an ice wall, and then there is a big dome over the top. And a lot of people go further and say there's actually nothing outside the dome. The enclosed Earth in that little snow globe is the entirety of the universe. So that's the prevailing model. You can quibble with people over the details, but that's most of it. And, I think it's interesting what that says about how people get into this belief. There's this misconception that flat Earth is this really old theory that we've believed for ages. And in fact, that's not true. I mean, thousands of years ago, we were able to establish that Earth is round, and that's because you can prove it quite easily. Some experiments with, the naked eye, some with pretty basic math. And it wasn't until around the 1840s that flat Earth, as I just described it, started making a comeback, and that coincided with a rise in belief in the natural sciences. There were emerging theories of evolution and of theories that maybe put the importance of religion on the back burner. And I think it's no coincidence that a theory like flat Earth, which just roundly dismisses science, became so popular around the time that science was challenging people's understanding of their place in the world.
So interesting. Yeah, I mean, the reason I brought up the boat on the cover here is because, when I mentioned to people that I was reading this book, that we were doing this event, they would say, oh, well, like the flat earth, I mean, that was only disproved by Christopher Columbus, for example. But I think what's interesting about your book is that really, I mean, this dates back to antiquity, that the idea that the spherical earth was pretty widely accepted. And so, you know, I mean, you mentioned here the idea that flat earth comes back into vogue in the 19th century. I mean, there's such great sketches of this sort of flat earth commune, you know, where this all begins and the guy who starts it. I mean, if you could just set that up.
Absolutely. So, you know, we can mostly blame one guy for the emergence of modern flat Earth theory, and this was a guy named Samuel Robotham. And you know how sometimes you come across a character who's kind of reprehensible, but kind of near to your heart. I can sort of imagine a Samuel Robotham in modern day. You know, he was kind of a young layabout idealist. He dabbled in this failed socialist commune. It all fell apart and they had a hermit that they couldn't get rid of. And it was, you know, it was an interesting yarn. And after that failure.
Well, I mean, there's a detail where they're like, you know, they start writing like newsletters about how lazy everyone else is, you know, and it's like, some of us like Keith aren't doing their jobs, you know, and it's very specific. So just these scenes in the book are just so great. It
was amazing because I found that, and you know, I went through their old newspaper archives. And yeah, I mean, it really read so much like insular lefty Twitter infighting that you come across. You know, this guy is drunk all the time and this guy won't get up in time for work. It was just really funny to see that, you know, the people have kind of been the same for hundreds and hundreds of years. But yeah, that commune just fell apart about 2 years or so. And after that, this fellow, Samuel Robotham, was looking for work, really, looking for his next pivot. And he had a few false starts. He tried preaching some weird theories. He started selling fake medicine. He believed that drinking carbonated water, which was effectively like old-timey Dr. Pepper, would make people immortal because it would stop their joints from gumming up. But he eventually went back to something that he said he'd been working on while he was on this commune. And this commune was on the banks of this long, flat canal. And when you were at that vantage point, I can kind of understand how Earth would look flat. So Samuel Robotham started writing these pamphlets and later books, arguing that on the basis of his observations on this canal, Earth was flat. And he had sketches that he drew that are quite similar to the current flat earth model that I described. And he started amassing a following, telling people that this was the real truth of Earth. And not only that, but that the round Earth myth was being promoted by scientists and that everyone was lying to you. And he started getting a lot of traction.
I mean, what's so funny about this is at the same time, even as this is catching on, even in today, obviously now we don't think much of flat earth as an idea, but even then people were just like, you know, this guy's a joker. You know, they would put these bets down and say, you know, prove flat earth is fake, and some guy would say, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll do it. And the flat earthers have to like destroy his telescopes and stuff, all this stuff. And so I mean, ultimately, you know, tell me about some of these other characters. I mean, this Lady Blount who becomes, just like I think of QAnon, we have all these kind of personalities who are promoting it, or you think of your kind of like fringe Trump characters. I mean, there's so many great characters in the book.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Like I said, people do fall into these archetypes, whether it's 1800s or 2020s. And you mentioned this, that they would try and coax round earthers into debating with them. There was this instance where a flat earther named John Hampton said, he was, by the way, very wealthy. He had inherited tons of money and was just spending it down the drain on flat earth causes. And he put out this advertisement saying, I'm going to pay just ungodly sums to anybody who can prove that Earth is round. And there was a very well-respected scientist, Alfred Wallace Russell, who said, yeah, okay, I can do that. That's no problem. And much like the YouTube debates we'll see in modern day, when someone with a crazy theory and someone with a decent scientific backing try and go head to head, it turns into a bit of a circus. So Wallace came out to this the canal where it had all started and set up his telescopes and like, there, look, see, you can't see X far away because of the curvature of the earth. And John Hampden, the flat earther, had brought in a referee who was secretly a flat earther, and they just started wreaking havoc. They were knocking over the telescope and, saying, oh, I think your measurements are off here. Just all these little slapstick gags. And it sounded funny reading the accounts from the time, but it actually turned really serious because when Wallace went to collect his money, not only did they refuse to pay up, but they started this legal campaign against him, this campaign of threats, and it went on for decades. These people just trolled him for years and years. They went to jail because they kept libeling him. They lost all their money, but it really ruined everybody's life. Everybody who was involved in that episode, it was just a huge drain on their lives. And another character you mentioned, Lady Blunt, she reminds me of a YouTube celebrity these days. She was a flat earther who wrote these songs about flat earth, and she wrote these novels about flat earth, and she would burst out into song. She was this very colorful character, and in this way, flat earth was sort of it was an entertainment source, I think, for a lot of people. Even though it wasn't a prevailing theory, people thought it was funny and interesting enough to engage with.
So, a couple years later, we get another instance of flat earth appearing as a community, just to say the sort of American flat earth dictatorship, I think maybe it's fair to say. I mean, I had never heard of this story before I got into your book. It's so interesting, the idea. I think of today as flat earth like someone might post on Instagram or something. But I mean, the idea that flat earth was a really thriving community in this town called Zion. But what was going on there?
So Zion was this planned religious community in Illinois, early 1900s. And it was founded so that this church could effectively, run their own ideal, pure community by religious law. What happened a couple years in was that their founder, who is not a flat earther, got pretty much deposed in a coup. There was a much more radical preacher who came through, took everything over and started implementing flat earth beliefs. And you say dictatorship, and that's not an exaggeration. That's literally true. This guy called himself a theocrat. And he could rule with an iron fist because although he was not the mayor, he had made everybody sign over all their property rights to him. He had much like a Scientology, he had like 1,000-year lease on everyone's home. And he controlled the schools, he controlled the town budget and the police. And when he started implementing flat earth, well, he could do that like a dictator because who could argue with him? And yeah, he preached flat earth in the schools. They changed their church hymns to remove references to the round earth. And so for decades, people lived under the iron fist of this flat earth guy because, that was the only reality they had.
It's so interesting. I mean, you mentioned the guy calling himself a theocrat. There's a great detail in the book where it shows how kind of the vibe changes in the town, where it's like the previous newspaper is called something like Serenity and Healing. And then this guy takes over and he says, all right, our newspaper is now called the Theocrat. It's like, we're really getting serious about flat earth here. I mean, just to sort of wrap up the great history moments of flat earth, obviously a big moment comes with the moon landing, the space program in both the United States and Soviet Union. And, this sets up what I believe was the Flat Earth Society at this point. This becomes kind of like a real crisis moment for flat earth, as people might imagine. There's no pictures from the satellites of the ice wall. So, I mean, talk to me about that kind of crisis of faith for flat earth.
Yeah, so mid-century, this group called the Flat Earth Research Society emerged in the UK, and they were kind of quaint compared to today's flat earthers. They just wanted to hang out at their friend's house and occasionally have a meeting. But much like flat earthers of today, even when they were presented with pretty incontrovertible evidence of the globe, they were really reluctant to accept it. So, of course, a space race was going on at that time. And the first time Soviets orbited the Earth on a satellite, the flat earthers were really thrown for a loop because they couldn't figure out well, what just happened here? Like, you can't orbit the Earth because you can't go out there. And initially, and almost to this guy's credit, the leader of the Flat Earth Society said at the time, he's like, well, I don't actually know what happened, but give him a little bit of time. And he came up with an explanation. And he told all the newspapers that what must have happened was, although that astronaut or cosmonaut Soviet thought he had gone around the Earth, he'd actually just done like a circle, like on the face of a clock over the flat disk. So it's crazy, it was a case of people having their conclusion before they had the supporting evidence. And when new evidence emerges, they gotta say, okay, how can we kind of warp it and make it fit into this puzzle that we've already established is the one true answer?
I mean, I feel like a theme in the book, and really we see in conspiracy thinking so often, is people who are, whether they're stubborn, whether they're trying to save face, when they're just clearly just disproven their beliefs, they just double down and they kind of like are like, all right, give me a second, I gotta think of some more garbage that I can believe. Like, I believe the founder of the Flat Earth Society, his kind of original claim to fame was, or his supervillain origin story perhaps, is that he was like, look, why are we spending all this time with planes that fly around? What we should do is have a plane that goes up, and then as the Earth rotates, so you just go for 5 hours, and then you'll be the equivalent of flying somewhere for 5 hours. And people are like, that's not how it works. And then that sort of sends him into this zone.
That's exactly what happened. This was one of the most just incredible cases of doubling down until an idea just completely overtakes your life that I've ever seen. This guy, he had like a high school education. And he spent some time just hanging out at the library and looking at sketches for flying machines. And he said, well, hang on. If the world is moving underneath us, why don't we just go up in a plane and hover there and wait until the relevant part of the Earth circles down underneath us? And the reason for that you can't do it is the Earth's atmosphere is moving with you. You don't jump off the ground and suddenly you're in a vacuum and you land 20 feet away because the Earth has moved. It doesn't work that way. But because he got what I think he called it like a sloppy push off from his teachers when he suggested it, he felt really, he felt insulted. He felt a little alienated. And for that reason, he just devoted himself to this line of inquiry for decades and decades until he launched the Flat Earth Society and found that he had some fellow travelers there.
So such an interesting character. This guy's maybe one of the most put upon characters in a book filled with them. I mean, this is a guy who at one point they say to him, have you convinced anyone? And he said, well, like my wife is maybe like halfway there or what have you, and he's getting invited to basically like frat houses where they'd be like, wouldn't it be a kick if this guy shows up? But I think one of the funniest moments for flat earthers is when it becomes like an insult, not to call them flat earthers, but to call someone else you don't like. And he's like, you're as dumb as those flat earthers.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think that's something they realized midway through. And there was a moment in UK Parliament when people were calling each other flat earthers as an insult, and flat earthers were like, hang on.
Hey, we're right here.
So bad. Yeah. But it's funny, the Flat Earth Society did exist in that moment in mid-century UK, but it wasn't very popular. And there's pretty decent evidence that people were joining as a joke, there was a news anchor. He had a background in flight and aviation. He was one of their biggest hype men because he thought it was hilarious when they were trying to find somebody to take over the Flat Earth Society because the founder was in very poor health. His wife actually suggested giving all the founding documents to a guy who was a round earther but was interested in alternate theories just from a philosophical perspective. So it almost died there. They almost gave it to this university researcher who would have hung on to the documents. It's a curiosity. But fortunately for the Flat Earth Society, maybe not so fortunately for the rest of us, an American took interest and made his claim for leadership, and the Flat Earth Society jumped the Atlantic and took hold here.
Right. So this takes us up to sort of contemporary flat Earth. So, we're at the point where this guy, his wife is halfway converted on flat Earth. Everyone, these frat boys are jeering him, all this stuff. And then something happens and it's the internet. And so suddenly that takes us to where you're going to flat Earth conferences. We have flat Earth people making their own rockets. So, what effect did the internet have on flat Earth's growth?
So flat Earth was, it was a curiosity. It was kind of a joke, and I found this, through the early 2000s, and I found that like newspaper columnists would hit up the Flat Earth Society occasionally just for comment, because it was kind of funny. Hey, what do you think about the latest rocket launch? And the Flat Earth Society would condemn it and say that it was all a hoax, etc. But that changed in the mid 2010s. You can point to pretty specifically where it changed. It changed in 2014. And by that point, what we know of as the Flat Earth Society had kind of gone out of vogue. It still existed, didn't have a really strong leader, didn't have in-person meetups. What happened instead was YouTube became the locus for the Flat Earth movement. And people's kind of obscure videos. There was this notorious German one that was talking about how flight patterns would work on a flat Earth. Those videos started getting a lot of traction because they were so out there that people clicked on them. And I don't say that judgmentally because I click on weird videos all the time. I'm absolutely part of the problem. But because these flat Earth videos started performing quite well in YouTube's recommendation algorithm, people took notice. People either started earnestly watching them and earnestly considering the arguments they made, or engaging with them very cynically and being like, okay, flat Earth, that's kind of funny. And I see that these other flat Earth videos are performing pretty well. So I'm gonna dabble. I'm gonna make a video just asking questions, that kind of thing. And from that atmosphere of partially cynical, partially genuine inquiry, there was this huge surgence of flat Earth videos and a huge boost by the YouTube algorithm to people who weren't necessarily looking for flat Earth videos. I've spoken to people who found them because they were recommended via videos about astronomy, videos about religion, and people would get, it's a cliche, but suck down the rabbit hole a little bit because YouTube kept serving them this flat Earth content.
And so this gets to kind of the crux of it, because I think if you look at it, certainly before reading the book, people say, okay, yeah, they believe something dumb. Plenty of people do. What's the problem here? And so, talk to me about some of these people who have really had their lives ruined by flat Earth.
Absolutely. You can kind of imagine how a theory like flat Earth would be disruptive to someone's life because it's a really strange claim to make. And when people realize that their friends or loved ones are serious about flat Earth, well, that sometimes invites a little ostracization. A lot of flat earthers I know feel alienated from people that they were previously close to because they can't talk about this thing that was so important to them, or their friends made fun of them, and that really hurts. So there's a bit of social death in flat Earth, and I think other conspiracy communities as well. And the vicious cycle of that is not only do people pull away from their loved ones in real life, but they move further into these online communities almost to compensate for those friendships they lost. So they drift further and further into this world. So that's one destructive element. But I've also met people who are doing just really personally dangerous things to pursue flat Earth. I've met multiple people who told me that they're going to the depths of Antarctica to find the ice wall. I talked to this one guy at a conference. He's like, yeah, there's about a 5% chance to make it out alive. I'm like, well, why are you telling me that? Like, don't do it, but it was important to him. And I don't think he's actually done it. I probably would have heard something about that on the news, I think. But it,
got over the wall.
Yeah, that proposition is really upsetting when someone tells you straight face, I'm probably going to die looking for the ice wall. It's like something's gone wrong here. And the worst instance of something going wrong was I read about it in the book, an an amateur rocketeer, a stuntman named Mike Hughes, who was going to shoot himself into space and see what he could see up there. And it ultimately cost him his life a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's a tragic story, and it's sort of the frame of the book is this flat earther who wants to get up into the sky, I guess, and see the flat Earth. And you're interacting with him and saying, well, I don't know about building an amateur rocket, to shoot yourself into space. And obviously, it ends in his death. I mean, when you heard that news, obviously you were working on the book. I mean, how did you react?
Pretty poorly. I was actually off work that day, and so I started getting texts. I'm like, oh no, because it's one thing to hear about something crazy and tragic, and it's another when you've known that person for a couple years and talk fairly regularly. So it was rough because I knew what he was doing was dangerous. I knew that there was a good chance he would get seriously hurt. And yet, I think somehow, maybe this is my own form of disbelief, but even knowing rationally that that was a possibility, I don't think I really considered all the implications of it happening. And so after that, I had frankly written a chapter about him in this wild pursuit, and I had to go back and reconsider it and re-report and rewrite it and talk to the people who knew him better and ask more why he was doing it and less the specifics of that stunt.
So this is obviously a sort of a high time for conspiracy theories in American politics and culture. We got QAnon, Pizzagate, Comet Ping Pong, just a few doors down from Politics and Prose. We've got all kinds of stuff. How do, and of course, with the coronavirus, we have a real age of quack cures as well. So I mean, how does Flat Earth and the Flat Earth community interact with all of those?
Flat Earth has really sort of melded into the broader conspiracy landscape, even in the past couple years. Journalist Anna Merlin has a really good descriptor for this. She calls it the conspiracy singularity. And something I think you and I have probably both observed is that there seems to be a bit more cross-pollination in conspiracy worlds. When I was first looking at Flat Earth in 2017, 2018, I found that it wasn't completely siloed, but it was a little bit more of a discrete bubble. And in the ensuing years, I've found that it's definitely interacting more with other conspiracy theories. The Flat Earth pages that I would follow on Facebook, which used to be a bit more narrowly tailored on that theory, are now posting coronavirus stuff. They're posting, thinly veiled QAnon. And I encountered this in real life in 2019 at a Flat Earth conference when these women approached me to give me some jewelry. And I'm like, oh, thank you, I guess. I looked at it, it had this little Q bangle. I'm like, yo, what is this? And they're like, oh, well, we've got a business card in there. It was for a QAnon site. I'm like, are you Flat Earthers at all? Or are you just like hanging out here? They're like, well, no, we're not Flat Earthers, but we come to a whole bunch of events to try and spread the word of QAnon. And we thought that Flat Earthers would be receptive, and they've been great. And that was kind of a jaw-dropping moment for me, because I'm like, I mean, that's smart. Like it's awful, but it's extremely canny, and it shows that conspiracy theorists are aware that you can recruit across theory lines. So yeah, it's mutated a little bit, and I think it's gone into hyperdrive in the COVID era when everyone's got a weird theory and everyone's online and people aren't as maybe grounded in IRL reality.
So, to that effect, I'm sure you've gotten these emails from people who say, my relative is lost in a conspiracy theory, whether it be flat Earth or something else. How do I get them out of it? I mean, what kind of people do you think are drawn to conspiracy theories like flat Earth, and what, if anything, can be done, if you have someone in your own life who's involved in it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to a degree, everybody is somewhat susceptible to conspiracy thinking, and it's because it's not like a specific brain worm. It's an actual human thought process kind of misfiring. When we don't have enough information or the available information feels insufficient, it doesn't reaffirm our prior beliefs. Sometimes we go looking for alternate answers. And, I think everyone's probably guilty of that to some degree. And there also are real conspiracies. Saying conspiracy theory does not negate the existence of like Iran-Contra. That happened. And that was a conspiracy. But I think the people who get very sucked into conspiracy theories, it's providing something of like an emotional and a social need for them. It's letting them into this smaller in group that tells them that their beliefs are valid and that there's an outside force working against them. And I think that maps really neatly onto the politics of today, especially with the Republican Party. It's inherently, there's a very conspiratorial rhetoric going on there, where the party leader, Donald Trump, is saying that the election was rigged, in that I think maybe on an even more emotional note, that you, the true American people, the true patriots, are being had. That people are trying to dupe you and take something away from you. And I think that kind of emotional appeal really speaks to people who are afraid of losing things, or who, rightly or not, feel disenfranchised. And those, I think, are the biggest and easiest targets for conspiracy theory.
And I imagine my experience with QAnon, there's also this aspect of secret knowledge, or like this idea that, people would, like in QAnon's case, there's like, I know what's going to happen before it happens. And I'm sure in flat earth, it's the same thing, where it's like, you bozos, you think the earth is a sphere, but like, I know the truth. I mean, did you see that in your research?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that's totally true. I think QAnon is one of the best places to observe it, where people feel like a conspiracy theory is almost like an adventure game. They're looking for the pieces to the puzzle, all the clues, and they think that eventually they'll line up into some great picture. And of course, it's not true. But with flat earthers, I think there was that element, and they also are very interested in ultimately being vindicated. That's something that QAnon people talk about all the time. But I actually spoke to this one ex-flat earther, and I'm so grateful for how honest he was about it. And he said when the flat earth reality came to being and everyone was suddenly awakened from their round earth slumber, that people would realize that he was one of the only ones who had been right. He said, I was going to be huge. And I think that's really a powerful draw to people, like to be the only one in on this secret knowledge, and to be the only one who understands when there's some great revelation, to be a leader when that movement comes. I think that is a really nice promise for people who want to believe.
That's so interesting. Now, we have a few more minutes before the Q&A, and so I have a quick question for you. And folks, feel free to get your Q&As in the box there on the Zoom. And my final question is, what do they think of the moon? How do they explain the moon?
The moon is such a quandary in flat earth. There have been so many theories. Rowbotham, the flat earth founder we were talking about, he said it was kind of a celestial object. It wasn't too big or too far away. But he ran into difficulties talking about eclipses, especially solar eclipses, when the moon would have moved in front of the sun. And he said, ooh, that's an issue, because sometimes you can see the moon. It doesn't square with my understanding of the moon. So he said that there were mysterious dark celestial bodies out there. So the moon was its own floating entity, and there were other kind of X factors up there. The founder of the Flat Earth Society, he would sometimes say that the moon was maybe semi-transparent because he thought he could see stars through it. That's one of the less compelling arguments I've heard. And it's most popular right now to say that the moon is just a light up there, like the sun. They're kind of small because, Earth and the universe are fairly small. And that, they don't believe that the moon's light is coming from the sun bouncing off it. They believe it's self-illuminating. So every day it just decides to light up a little bit more, and then it goes back. And they believe it's just this mid-sized thing circling around a natural satellite under the dome.
Fascinating. Well, there's a lot of mental acrobatics. I don't think I'm convinced. But we'll have to see. Okay, great. Well, I think this is a great time to go into our Q&A. Okay, first of all, someone asked, this is a great question. What mental techniques did you use to keep your sanity while immersed in the thinking of flat earthers and other conspiracy theorists? Thank you for the question.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think one of the best ways to help anybody in a conspiracy realm is to just have like real world grounding. And so that's one thing I sort of recommend for people who are maybe questioning a theory and looking to get out, or people who are trying to get their relatives out. And I'm really fortunate to have, first of all, a great team at work who, if it ever looks like I'm going flat, they would give me a pretty good fact check. So shout out to the beast there, and friends and family, and I really I can't endorse enough just logging off sometimes, touching grass, so to speak. So it's and that makes all my conversations with flat earthers sound very negative, and that's not actually the case. These are people, and they're people I'm interested in talking to. So although it can get kind of intense and we don't agree on anything, it's not as if I'm gritting my teeth through the whole thing. I'm interested in why people believe what they do. So trying to approach it with a spirit of curiosity, and then after that, yeah, going for a run or going and hanging out with my dog.
Well, I think that can make it so interesting because I'm sure you have relatively positive relationships with some flat earthers. I mean, my experience with conspiracy theorists, they're not like, in the most part, raving lunatics. They're often people just like you and I, and yet they have become completely convinced of something that's just ludicrous.
Yeah, and so we'll see how those relationships go after a few weeks of the book being out in the world. But I hope folks think it's fair. I don't think I'm not out here to bash flat earthers. And to that point, I mean, it's true. A lot of people in conspiracy movements you wouldn't really know unless you asked them specific questions. I find that this is a strange thing, and I guess it's a recurring theme throughout conflicting political ideals, and that people can get along really well on an interpersonal basis. Most people want to be nice. It's only when you start moving into these more team-based affiliations, which everyone does and it's natural, but on this larger scale, that things get a little bit tense. So yeah, I'm happy to talk to conspiracy theorists, but when say bigotry or something comes out, then it's that's a bit rougher.
So here's another question, perhaps an exasperated reader. Do any of these folks ever fly in airplanes? The Earth's curvature is pretty hard not to notice when you're taking off or landing. How do they explain what they see?
Yes, they fly in airplanes pretty regularly. A couple digressions about flight here, because it's an issue for them, and sometimes they'll try and use it to prove their theories. So flat earthers will make some weird claims about flights. They'll claim that when you go up in a plane, you can hold like a measuring level, like the kind of thing that you would use to hold a painting. And because that level is flat in a plane and not you're not seeing the little bubble curve, that must prove that Earth is flat way up there. And in fact, that's not true, because the plane is always going to be level to the Earth. That's what you're running gravity parallel to. That's what the bubble is responding to, not incremental changes as you move through the atmosphere. So that's one instance where, yes, they're up in a plane. Yes, if they have a wide enough degree of visibility at 35,000 feet, you can actually see curvature, but they'll use it to argue that their theory is actually right. And another weird quirk about flying is they claim that certain flight paths are impossible on the round Earth. And one of the weirdest conversations I had was with a woman at a flat earth conference, and we were talking about flight patterns. And she's like, well, you can't fly direct from the US to Australia. You can't fly direct from the US to South Africa. I'm like, but I've done that. I've done both of those. And she's like, no. My cousin or someone and she was close to is a flight attendant. And, she knows the truth that they're deluding you about where the plane is going. So all of that is to say that flat earthers fly and they have their excuses, and sometimes they'll even work it into the theory.
So interesting. Yes. So let's see. Is there any conceivable way to get these people to change their minds, such as launching them on a Jeff Bezos rocket and letting them see the curvature of the Earth from 60 miles up? I suppose that's related. I mean, I guess the overall gist of what you're saying is, and I think you really handle these sort of flat earth arguments very ably in the book, that sort of whatever these folks see, they come up with something else. But can you talk about the sort of psychological concept of that, of people sort of, working around what's right in front of their faces?
Totally. I mean, there's a lot of motivated reasoning that goes into any conspiracy belief. People are approaching it not because it's the most valid scientific argument, but because it speaks to an emotional need they have, or they want to feel like their prior beliefs are being supported. So when people are looking at all this evidence, they feel very comfortable discarding the stuff that doesn't speak to them. And they will they're very happy to hold conflicting pieces of so-called evidence, right? Elements of the theory that don't necessarily line up, but appear to poke holes in the globe model. And they'll give those arguments a ton of credence in ways that don't hold up in rigorous scientific inquiry. But when one of their theories is debunked, they're very able to dismiss it. There's a couple famous flat earth videos that list 100 to 200 questions to be asking about the globe. And when you answer one of those questions, they say, okay, well, what's the answer to 157, So it's very easy for people to apply different standards to their beliefs than they do to non-conspiratorial beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Sort of an unfortunate look at the state of our world. And here's another one. Another questioner asks, over the last 2 years, it seems like conspiracy theories have become so much more prevalent. Do you think the pendulum will swing back to sanity? Or have social media and other factors created a new normal with regards to the prevalence of conspiracy theories?
Oh man, I don't know. And I rag on social media a lot, but I think at a certain point now, and part of the reason things feel so crazy is that these theories are now coming from people of actual influence and power. It's one thing for me to say that, yeah, YouTube is responsible for a lot of the early flat earth video spread, but it's another thing to grapple with the fact that the GOP right now is a conspiratorial party. I mean, one of Trump's stump speech elements is that the election was stolen, and that's not true. But for that to be such a vital part of the party platform now, I think we're in pretty dangerous waters there. And I think in order to come back, you have to grapple with the idea that that this is becoming a very central part of certain people's political identity. And man, I wish I knew how to pull people back from that. I'm only so good at debating. But I think you need to disentangle those theories from people's sense of self.
Great. Here's another question. What do you think that the future of flat Earth is? We had someone asking, do you think flat Earth is primed to blow up in our society like QAnon did? And they say, to put it another way, is it fresh hell certified, which would be a reference to our podcast Fever Dream. So a listener there. Where's flat Earth headed from here?
I don't think it's ever going to hit QAnon levels. I think, in famous last words, I think there's enough saturation of round Earth in our reality. I think enough people are accepting of it. To use a unfortunately timely example, goodness. It was a major Republican politician. I'm kicking myself for not remembering the name, but just yesterday put out in this manifesto, basically it was a wildly anti-transgender document saying, men are only men, women are only women, there are only two genders, Earth is round, etc. And it was it was a funny invocation of round Earth as this mutually established fact, because that is a fact, but other things that he was citing are much more politically loaded, are sometimes wrong. And so I think we are never going to see a huge flat Earth explosion because round Earth is so bipartisan. There's such a bipartisan consensus. That said, I think maybe the future for flat Earth is growing a little bit and also acting as a waypoint for other conspiracy theories. I've seen so much crossover between flat Earth lately and other sometimes extremely bigoted theories. I've seen extremely anti-Semitic QAnon telegrammers pushing flat Earth. I've seen flat earthers jump into other fringe theories, into COVID denialism. So I think as conspiracy theorists get maybe better at networking online, which I think has happened during the pandemic, we're going to see this bleed over, and more people are exposed to it, and more flat earthers are exposed to other theories.
Have you ever successfully talked a flat earther out of their beliefs? Do you think it's worth debating with them? And then I'm going to combine another question here. You know, I think you mentioned at least one flat earther who is no longer believes in flat Earth. You know, when people do leave it, what does that process look like? What inspires them to leave?
Mm-hmm. I don't typically debate flat earthers, and that's for a couple reasons. One, I think as a journalist who's been reporting this book, I try not to tamper with the subject matter too much. Like I'm trying to do it kind of anthropologically and just sort of like I'm just a fly on the wall, just, talk to me. And I'm not really trying to convince you either way. But, another challenging proposition of flat earth debates is that, hang on, Will, I'm going to take out my AirPods because they just made the low
Sure,
battery noise.
sure.
Um, but I think you can hear me. So I'm going to
Yeah, I can hear
continue
you.
talking while I change the settings here. Just a second. I think the frustrating proposition that comes when you say I'm going to debate flat Earth is that it proposes that round Earth and flat Earth are equally valid, that they are in conversation with each other. And in fact, they're not at all. I mean, round Earth is established science. So that's one reason I don't necessarily debate flat Earthers. And I think often debates, at least when we think about them um, in the context of like the YouTube debates, where people get really contentious and it's all about proving the other side wrong. I don't think those change minds. I think those are more of a blood sport. People want to dig in and they want to win. Um, so, although people can be deconverted, I don't think those are the best mechanism. And you mentioned people I've spoken to who have come around. Round. Um, they often do that not from these tense debates that I was describing, but through more compassionate discussion. I spoke to two people who are vocally anti flat Earth now after having supported the theory previously, and both said that they came out of it because they had been having conversations over a period of time actually with round earthers who weren't trying to prove them wrong, who weren't trying to tell them that they were dumb, but answering their questions honestly and explaining, hey, that's why that experiment didn't work. Hey, this is why you can't see X far over the horizon. That was one thing that helped them, was the compassionate conversation. And the other thing that helped them was having family and friends and real world community that accepted them back, that didn't say, oh, yeah, remember when you were a flat earther, haha, and really humiliate them about it. So those are some elements. I think people have to be willing to change their minds. I don't think you can force it. Um, but for people who are open to being persuaded and open to new information, that those human conversations are one of the best ways to do it.
Here's another question.
Hey, Will, I'm going to
Something.
stop you because I can't hear you, and this is fully my fault. My
Oh,
headphones have died. I'm going to fix that. Okay.
great. How about now?
Just a moment. I'm so sorry about this.
No problem. Well, for the folks who can't hear me,
What to do here? It's pretty bad. Ba, 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 ba. Let's see, microphones. Here we go.
there we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fabulous. Okay, great. All right. Since you mentioned political ideology a lot, have most of the people you've talked to been Republicans slash conservatives, or like, what is the political valence of flat Earth? Like, what's the demo?
I think it leans conservative. A lot of people I've spoken to are like, I don't vote. They're very, very disenchanted with the whole political system. And I guess if you believe that politicians writ large were hiding the shape of the earth, you might be disenchanted too. But they definitely lean conservative. And last conference I went to, I was sitting next to a guy in a MAGA hat the whole time, which was a little unusual for flat Earth. Um, but I think it lends itself pretty easily to conservative religious thought because it's always been kind of a reaction to theories of evolution and stuff like that. I say theory of evolution like it's not a fact. It is, but it's been a reaction to science and secularism. So that in itself lures, I think, a certain conservative leaning demographic. And, we keep talking about this crossover between conspiracy movements and how so much conspiratorial energy right now is coming out of the political right that I think it's a natural byproduct that the flat earth movement is going to become a bit more invested in things like election fraud. I saw this amazing Facebook post the other day and it just said Globers equal Antifa. And that it was very short, but it was pretty concise in its worldview, basically saying that that people who believe in the globe are supporting what they thought was a nefarious left-wing theory, and that I think is part of the way it's going.
So they call people globies, globers. Like what's the kind of the go-to like pejorative for spirit?
I did globers, globeheads, globetards, which I don't love. It's funny to try and find a pejorative for it because it's something that most people believe, and it's like, again, it's one of those places where you can kind of put yourself in a flat earther's shoes because, like, hang on, I don't think that's an insult. Like, why are you calling me that? But yeah, they've been workshopping the insult for a while.
That's great. Okay, let's see. Oh wait, did I feel like I maybe lost one I was focused on here? Let's see. Basically, here's a question for you. What? And I don't have this right in front of me, but basically, like, how many of people who say they're into flat Earth, they're doing it as a joke? I mean, how serious is every flat earther? I was struck by in your writing on the Flat Earth Society in the book, where you're talking about the founder and what the spokesman has to say. Yeah, like I'm almost certain he believes in flat Earth. This is the guy who runs the Flat Earth Society. So talk to me about that. I mean, how much of this is a joke or sarcastic? What happened?
So it's gone in and out of jokey phases. And to your point, the guy who most recently ran the Flat Earth Society, who's kind of disappeared into the ether, he used, I think, a pseudonym and gave some interviews that made me sort of doubt the strength of his convictions. He could be joking. Some flat earthers are kind of engaged in it for the lulls because it's so weird. I know a friend of my dad's joined the Flat Earth Society back when it was something you could get a membership card for because it was funny, right? And I relate to that. But these days, I think because it's such a larger and more vocal movement, I don't think many people are in it for the lulls. Because it used to be something so ludicrous, and now if you say, oh, I'm a flat earther, people have a point of reference and they say, yeah, I saw that guy with the flat earth sign down at the Stop the Steal rally, which is something that happened. So I think a lot of flat earthers these days, certainly the majority of people who will tell you that, are completely serious.
So yes, so the globies have not quite infiltrated flat Earth entirely yet. Great. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. We're almost at 8 o'clock. The book is right here, Off the Edge, and really there's so much material we didn't have a chance to get into in an hour, and really so many fabulous questions we also didn't have a chance to get into. So thank you everyone who contributed questions and watched tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, great moderating, Will, and Kelly. It's so fascinating to listen to you talk about flat earthers and conspiracy theories more generally, and to think about how it used to be, dismissed as a pretty frivolous topic has now become a much more serious one that's really worth focusing on and understanding much better, as and your book certainly contributes to our understanding of it a lot. To everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. A reminder that in the chat column, you can find a link for purchasing copies of Off the Edge. Here it is again. From all of us here at Politics and Prose,